Appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of you again today. What you're going to see today is another opportunity to review the bill that we've worked very hard on for about 9 months now with the planning department and with other stakeholders. We have tried to, as best possible, make this about the East Bank or the Imagine East Nashville Vision Plan. And we've used that as our main tool for designing the project that you see in front of you. 30% of the land that this property owner purchased has been dedicated and written into the DTC to be used as open space. That is unparalleled. There is no other development in Nashville, and in particular downtown, that is dedicated that much open space by a long shot. They are also dedicating space for much of the roadways and the bike lanes and the sidewalks. That's also all being dedicated to Metro. Again, not the kind of thing that you see, or I would encourage you to try to find one that's even vaguely similar to that. The design has been put in place to separate all the different types of transportation, both pedestrian, bicyclists, and motorists. And it's been built in a way where we're not trying to encourage this for traffic to go through here quickly. The intention here is that this is a community that's a destination, not a place where you move through this quickly. And so you'll notice that none of the roads are designed to move through quickly. And as I've mentioned before, in particular, the separation between the pedestrian environment and the vehicular environment on the boulevard and the promenade. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. Next for public comment is Mr. Richie Jones, speaking on Bill 2026-1273 in support. Mr. Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you today. My name is Richie Jones, resident of East Nashville. Been a resident of 1903 Holly Street and been in the neighborhood for 20 years. I'm also a landscape architect with a business here. I love my neighborhood. I've been here for a long time. Had the privilege of practicing here for quite a while. We also worked on the Envision East Bank plan. I've gone back in preparation for this and read that now 2 or 3 times. I have really yet to find anything that this zoning proposal is calling for that is sort of in opposition or at all not in keeping with the principles of the East Bank plan. The East Bank has 4 main principles: Envision East Bank, equitable and affordable East Bank. This plan delivers that through more residential density. We need more housing in Nashville. We need more housing on this side of the river, and this will provide that in a dense way, which we need, which helps everyone. Safe and simple multimodal connections. We have a new street grid, which is human scaled. Mid-block alleys that are going to separate service from loading and pedestrian space, integrating the East Bank Boulevard with a planned greenway and BRT, keeping the cycle track along Davidson, which is critically important for commuters of my neighborhood and beyond, and then a commitment to Vision Zero safety coordination, which is really amazing. We need more developers doing that. Respect for the river. We have a 75-foot publicly accessible riparian buffer zone. District scaled green infrastructure that is treating stormwater not as engineering, but an amenity. We're opening up the river to more people through POPs, which is directly what Envision East Bank calls for. I'm excited about that, to be able to get to the river in a meaningful way and actually use it and have retail and things like that along it will be wonderful. And then finally, a neighborhood for Nashvillians. This is going to support stoops and porches, streets that are residential in nature, retail streets as well. And then finally, again, a neighborhood for Nashvillians, grocery stores, things like that. So I urge you to vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you.
Next to deliver public comment is Logan Key, speaking on BL 2026-1273 in opposition.
Thank you,
Mr. Key, you're recognized.
Thank you, I appreciate it. With all due respect to the preceding speakers, ladies and gentlemen, this is the most consequential rezoning bill that this council term will face. this may be the most consequential rezoning bill, including the next council. And I would submit to you that 2 months' time, this past first reading 2 months ago, 2 months' time is insufficient for something this consequential that impacts neighborhoods. I reside at 1411 Fatherland Street. I've lived in East Nashville for almost 19 years. And if you don't get the zoning and the legislative piece right on this, you are going to hear from your constituents for years to come, and there will be nothing you can do to walk back the entitlements that will go along with this for the next few generations. And I would ask you this, if something this consequential was proposed in close proximity to your neighborhoods, as this is to Councilman Capps and Councilman Parker's, how would you feel? What level of deliberation would you insist on before this happens? There are some good amendments, and I want to emphasize those at this time. If you look at the amendment packet I have, Amendment 3, Amendment 5, Amendment 6, Amendment 7, Amendment 8, Amendment 9, Amendment 10, Amendment 11, Amendment 12, Amendment 16, Amendment 18 are amendments that I think make this less undesirable. Think about this. Ask the hard questions when it's time. What is it that provides housing in this? Where is that in the bill? Where are the priorities for accessibility? And where are the priorities for the construction impacts that this plot of land will experience for the next 2 generations? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Key. Is there anybody else wishing to deliver public comment today? Seeing none, I'll declare the public comment period closed. Before we move on to our agenda, I want to issue a preemptive apology to Chair Toombs and our friends on Budget and Finance. We have a little bit of a large agenda today, primarily amendments to item 17. We're going to work to go through these as fast as we can and hopefully not keep our budget friends too late. I currently have every item on the agenda on consent apart from items 8, BL 2026-1315, item 17, BL 2026-1273, and item 18, BL 2026-1284. Before I read the captions, are there any additional items which need to be removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'll proceed to read the captions, and if there's anything else that needs to be removed, we can remove them afterward. Item 1, RS 2026-1864, a resolution to, sponsors Toombs, Horton, Welsh, and Allen, a resolution to approve the First Amendment to a grant contract for constructing affordable housing approved by RS 2025-1524 between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, acting by and through the Metropolitan Housing Trust Fund Commission and Urban Housing Solutions. Item 2, RS 2026-1865, sponsors Toombs, Horton, Welsh, and Allen, a resolution to approve the First Amendment to a grant contract for constructing affordable housing approved by RS 2024-592 between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, acting by and through the Metropolitan Housing Trust Fund Commission and the William Franklin Buchanan Community Development Corporation. Item 3, RS 2026-1869, sponsors Toombs, Horton, and Allen, a resolution approving an application for a Historic Preservation Fund grant from the Tennessee Historical Commission to the Metropolitan Government, acting by and through the Metropolitan Historical Commission to fund support for a survey of 3 community subareas of Davidson County, North, South, and East, Southeast Nashville, which comprise a wide variety of racial and socioeconomic communities and histories. Item 4, RS 2026-1884, sponsors Evans, Toombs, Horton, and Evans Siegel, a resolution approving a participation agreement between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, acting by and through the Metropolitan Department of Water and Sewage Services and Swami Shriji Hermitage LLC to provide public sewer service improvements for Swami Shriji Hermitage's proposed development, as well as other existing properties in the area. Item 5, RS 2026-1886, sponsors Parker, Horton, and Evans Siegel, a resolution authorizing the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County to accept new public sanitary sewer mains and sanitary sewer manholes for property located at 117B Stratton Lane, north of the project location in the Broadmoor Drive right-of-way between 401 Walton Lane and 3101 Dickerson Pike, also known as Broadmoor Offsite Sewer. Item 6, RS 2026-1887, sponsors Vo, Horton, and Evans Siegel, a resolution authorizing the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County to abandon existing sanitary sewer main and to accept new public sanitary sewer main and sanitary sewer manholes for property located at 492 Craighead Street, also known as Vintage Fair Park. Item 7, RS 2026-1888, sponsors Harrell, Horton, and Evans Siegel, a resolution authorizing the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County to abandon existing public water main and to accept new public water main, relocation of a fire hydrant assembly, and vertical relocation of a sanitary sewer manhole for property located at 2244 Hobson Pike, also known as Resurrected Life Chapel. Item 9, BL 2026-1320, sponsors Gamble, Toombs, Horton, Evans Siegel, Vogt, Ewing, and Allen, an ordinance approving a greenway conservation easement between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County through the Metropolitan Board of Parks and Recreation and Domain Timberlake Multi-State 2 LLC, care of Clayton Properties Group, Inc., for greenway improvements at 552 Misty Creek Court. Item 10, BL 2026-1321, sponsors Taylor, Horton, Evans Siegel, Vogt, Ewing, and Allen, an ordinance approving a greenway conservation easement between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County through the Metropolitan Board of Parks and Recreation and 2500 W. Hyman LP for greenway improvements at 2518 W. Hyman Street. Item 11, BL 2026-1322, sponsors Vogt, Horton, and Evans Siegel, an ordinance authorizing 603 Southgate LLC to construct and install an underground encroachment at 601 Southgate Avenue. Item 12, BL 2026-1323, sponsors Parker, Horton, and Evans Siegel, an ordinance authorizing the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County to acquire permanent and temporary easements through negotiation, condemnation, and acceptance for the Manor Avenue Stormwater Improvement Project for property located at 1013 Manor Avenue. Item 13, BL 2026-1324, sponsors Toombs, Horton, and Evans Siegel, an ordinance authorizing the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County to accept new public water main and sanitary sewer mains, fire hydrant assembly, sanitary sewer manholes, and easements for property located at Lucille Street, also known as City Vista 2. Item 14, BL 2026-1325, sponsors Coupin, Parker, Horton, and Evans Siegel, an ordinance authorizing the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County to abandon existing public water and sanitary sewer mains, fire hydrant assembly, sanitary sewer manholes, and easements, and to accept new public water main and sanitary sewer mains, fire hydrant assembly, sanitary sewer manholes, and easements for 17 properties located at Cowan Street, Waterside Drive, River North Boulevard, and North 9th Street, also known as River North Early Works. Item 15, BL 2025-1163, sponsors Toombs, an ordinance to amend Title 17 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, the zoning ordinance of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County by changing from R8 SP zoning for properties located at 2130, 2132A, 2138A, 2138B, 2138C, 2140, and 2142 Buena Vista Pike, and 3005A, 3005B, 3007, and 3009 Cliff Drive at the southwest corner of Buena Vista Pike and Cliff Drive to permit a mixed-use development. Item 16, BL 2025-1164, sponsors Toombs, an ordinance to authorize building material restrictions and requirements for BL 2025-1163. That concludes the items proposed for the consent agenda. Is there any other items that need to be removed? Seeing none, do we have a motion? Moved, second? Yep. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any not voting? Consent agenda is recommended for approval, 10 in favor, 0 against, 0 not voting. First item not on consent is item 8. This is BL 2026-1315. Sponsors Cap, Horton, Evans Siegel, Huffman, Hill, Spain, Coupin, Welsh, Gadd, Allen, Swara, Evans, Ellis, Style, Parker, Foe, Benedict, Bradford, Weiner, and Ewing. This is an ordinance to amend Title II of the Metropolitan Code of Laws to create a new chapter establishing a permit prioritization program for affordable housing and daycare development projects. We are joined by the committee member and primary sponsor, Cap. Bear with me. There it is. Councilmember Cap, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I move approval, and I also have a substitute that I'd like to move.
Second. Moved and seconded. You're recognized with regard to the amendment as well.
Yes, I move the substitute.
Second. Moved and seconded for the substitute. Councilmember Cap, you're recognized on the substitute.
Thank you. So this substitute was done with some work with the Planning Department Housing Division. They had some suggestions for how this permit prioritization process could incorporate some other work they've done on affordable housing. So I'd like to ask them to speak to that so that we can discuss.
Oh. Is that to the administration or the planning department?
Planning Department, Ms. Hubbard, please.
Ms. Hubbard, you're recognized.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Angie Hubbard, Director of the Metro Housing Division. Our team has been administering this program since it was introduced in 2019, and we've had a lot of lessons learned. So we took this as an opportunity to clarify what projects would meet the affordable housing definition. And we're referring specifically to any project that has any income restriction in it because it has built-in compliance through that type of agreement, but also adding a pathway for projects that may not be tied to a Barnes Fund project or low-income housing tax credit through a voluntary agreement, and just cleaning up some other language that we found that made it unclear on the types of projects and what the process would look like. And then, of course, worked with the administration on adding daycares into the code and making this a permanent program for Metro.
Thank you for that explanation. Councilmember Capp, I'll go back to you.
Thank you. So that accounts for the new language in the substitute. The bill generally, and this is reflected in the substitute as well, really does two things. The original idea was to create a permit prioritization process for daycares, similar to the way that we've done that with affordable housing in the past. But then that affordable housing permit prioritization process was not sort of in the proper place in the code. So this legislation puts it in the right place in the code, sort of makes the program sort of live in the code in the right place, and adds daycares to it as well. Then we've added in some of the additions that the Housing Division has suggested. So it's a long piece of legislation. The main thing in it that's genuinely new is the daycare component, because I'd like us to help those move forward. I'd like folks who want to do those projects get a good upfront meeting to understand the process, save them time and money to help get some of those projects online. And that's what this legislation will do. So I ask for everybody's support.
Thank you for that explanation. Any discussion on the substitute? Councilmember Allen, you're recognized.
Thank you. I appreciate the sponsor bringing this forward. And to the Planning Commission, just to clarify, we continue to try to develop new tools like the mixed income housing pilot hopefully is coming back. And there's some talk about other things that we might be doing. As we do each of those, they will include whatever language it takes to fit underneath the umbrella that you've created here, probably.
Go ahead.
Yes, any project in which Metro has funding or an incentive, and we have a deed restriction tied to that, will automatically be eligible, and we are proactively creating those permits in CityWorks. So it's not just the letter that gets embedded in plans and specs that's circulated. There's now a dedicated special permit.
Great, thank you. And thank you for getting that part figured out, because I know that's made it work much better.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further discussion on the substitute? Seeing none, all in favor of the substitute? Any opposed? Any not voting? Recommend approval of the substitute. 11 in favor, 0 against, 0 not voting. We're now on the bill as substituted. Councilmember Allen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move my amendment. I can't remember what number it is. It's the one that deals
Amendment
with
2.
Number 2.
Moved and seconded. Go for an explanation.
And thanks. This just specifically articulates that inspections also were included in that prioritization process, or whatever we've renamed it. So not just the plans approval on the front end, but the inspection on the back end after it's built.
Thank you for that explanation. Any discussion on Amendment 2? Councilmember Capp, you're recognized.
I appreciate this. I just want to make sure that in a legislative sense, this will work on the substitute. So that may be a question for Brian.
I'll go to special counsel. You're recognized.
Councilmember, any changes to this bill were not part of what was substituted. So I think that at this point it would work. I think the two would work effectively.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Amendment 2? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Any not voting? Recommend approval of Amendment 2, 11 in favor, 0 against, 0 not voting. There is one additional amendment, Amendment 1 by Stiles. Is a committee member willing to move it for discussion purposes? Councilmember moved and seconded. Councilmember Parker, do you wish to speak on it? You're recognized.
You were present for the last committee discussion, Chair, but for anybody who wasn't, we did acknowledge that there's a desire to align the language in the code with best practices, which would be childcare rather than daycare. But because daycare is all throughout Title 17 and elsewhere in Metro Code currently, we're hoping that there will be a cleanup effort to address this issue in the future. And so the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee voted this legislation down, and I'll be voting against it again here. But again, looking forward to if any member wants to take that task on of updating that language throughout the code. I think it would be very welcome in these committees and on the floor.
Thank you for that explanation. Councilmember Cap, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I absolutely appreciate the idea behind this, but I can't support it for the same reason. Right now, that phrase doesn't refer to anything in the code, and so it would not be able to operate that way. But I hope we can clean it up in a future bill.
Thank you, Councilmember. I also had the same concerns. I think whatever the merits on improving the language, I think it makes sense to do it collectively rather than creating a discrepancy within our own code. So we'll also be joining you in voting against this. Any further discussion on Amendment 1? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? No. Any not voting? We recommend against approval, 0 in favor, 11 against, 0 not voting. We are now on the bill as substituted and amended by Amendment 2. Is there any further discussion on the bill overall? Councilmember Allen, you're recognized.
I'm just going to check again. So when I look at Amendment 2, it has the language again about all that specific stuff about 12% at 20% AMI. That doesn't overwrite what we just did in the substitute, because we don't want to do that.
Go to our counsel for that answer.
Councilmember, no, at this point, the things that were changed that were underlined are separate and distinct from
Okay.
what was said in.
Okay, so it'll just be the stuff that's underlined.
Yes.
Great, thank you for confirming.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Councilmember Parker, you're recognized.
Prior to consideration of Amendment 1, we had a motion on the bill as substituted and amended, and we've reverted to that motion after voting down Amendment 1. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. I
Amendment
just
1,
wanted to make sure
yes.
we were, thank you.
So we are now on the bill as substituted and amended by Amendment 2 and without an Amendment 1. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any not voting? Recommend approval, 11 in favor, 0 against, 0 not voting. Our next item not on consent is item 17. This is BL 2026-1273, sponsors Coupon and Stiles, an ordinance to amend Title 17 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, the zoning ordinance of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, to make various changes to the downtown code. Before we get started on this, we have a large number of amendments. For purposes of discussion, I have grouped them topically rather than numerically to help facilitate a more cohesive conversation on each topic, because several amendments touch related or the same topic. So we'll be taking them in that order, and if there's any that are inadvertently missed out, anybody please correct me. But to get us started, do we have a motion?
Move the bill.
Moved and seconded. I will go first to the primary sponsor. Councilmember Coupon, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone who has worked so hard on this bill. As we heard Mr. Key say earlier, this is a generational opportunity, probably one of the biggest rezonings we're going to work on, and I know that we've had, the planning department has worked for many, many months to put their DTC expansion together, and then move through planning commission and public engagement and all that, and then we've landed here today with, I believe, 18 amendments. I appreciate my colleagues working hard to share their thoughts and perspectives on this bill. I did want to remind folks that that this is not the end of the process. This is not an SP bill. This is a DTC bill. So there will be continued engagement on the MCSP and public realm and all that. So even hopefully this does pass tomorrow, this is not the end of the road. This is a 40-plus acre, decades-long development site that we expect to see to continue to grow over many, many years to come. And so just appreciate everybody that's worked on that. To kick us off, Chair, I guess we want to take the hotel amendments up first.
Yeah, I've got hotel motel uses first, starting with Amendment 1, of which you're the sponsor, if you'd like to move it.
So I'd actually like to move Amendment 2 with a brief explanation.
Okay, Amendment 2, do we have a second? Second, Councilmember Cooper, you're recognized.
Thank you. And I know one of the big conversations was making sure there was a prioritization of residential in this area. And so limiting hotels was something that was of interest to a number of members of the public. And so I put forward actually two amendments, one looking at hotel keys and one looking at geographic area. And I was hoping I could ask the planning table to weigh in on keys versus geographic area and what enforcement looks like, and just kind of in general, those two themes.
Thank you. I'll go to the planning table.
Thank you. So thank you for the opportunity to address this. And just as a reminder, the planning staff is here, and we are representing the recommendation of the Planning Commission, which did not limit hotels. Hotels were permitted across the site. Consistent, that's what the Planning Commission recommendation was. Speaking to how uses might be handled or limited in different ways, I talked through this a bit previously. We do have some uses that are limited by geographic area or one use parking that I can think about that's for the Second Avenue Preservation District. And so geographic area is something that we have utilized in the past for limiting uses. We have not to date, as I've expressed before, limited a use by something like keys or units or something of that nature. And so that could be difficult to administer or enforce, but we have done by geographic area. But again, the Planning Commission did not limit.
Thank you for that explanation. Go back to you, Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you and appreciate that. So so I'd like to continue on with this amendment. And I know my colleague also has a similar amendment, so would be curious to hear. I don't know if you want to open that discussion on this particular amendment, or have us each move one, or how you want to handle that.
Yeah, we'll stay on this amendment. We have a current motion for it. Is there any further discussion on Amendment 2? Councilmember Capp, you're recognized.
My understanding from the committee meeting we had last week is that regulating this by keys is something that the planning department did not think would really be enforceable. So I certainly respect their experience on that, and I wonder if they could speak to that a little bit.
Manning, you're recognized.
Sure. There are no uses that we currently regulate in that way across downtown by either number of units, number of keys, and so it's likely difficult to enforce or administer.
Thank you for that explanation. Any further discussion on Amendment 2? Seeing none, all in favor? Is that 2 ayes? All against? No. 1 second. Can you keep your hands up, please? Count 6. Any not voting? We're missing some. I've got 2 in favor, 6 against, and 0 not voting. Can anyone that's voting in favor please raise your hand, please? 2, 4. And then all opposed, please raise your hand. We lose. I've got 4. Oh, right. Okay. We have 4 in favor and 7 against, and 0 not voting. Next, taking this topically, is Amendment 3 by Cap, also addressing the hotel motel use. Councilmember Cap, do you wish to move your amendment?
Yes, move, please.
Moved and seconded. Councilmember Cap, you're recognized with respect to your amendment.
Thank you. So this arose from, at least in detail, from the conversation we had in East Bank Committee last week. The way that this came out of the Planning Commission is that the uses of these buildings, and this is in keeping with how the DTC works, is regulated by the floor plate of the buildings. The bill that's before us has 3 floor plates that are suitable for office use, and the rest are smaller, which are suitable for residential or hotel use. My purpose in bringing this amendment is that certainly vital neighborhoods that are filled with people have some hotels in them, but I'm not aware of any great neighborhoods filled with people and families that are mostly hotels. And to that end, I've brought this amendment to limit where exactly hotels could go on the site. They can be part of a great mixed-use neighborhood, of course, and also to make sure that what we're building there is housing, that we're legislating that this will be mostly housing. And so for that purpose, I've filed this amendment and asked for your support.
Thank you for an explanation of Amendment 3. Any discussion? See, Councilmember Parker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm resident support of this amendment. I agree with the overall spirit that, you know, we don't want to be building a single-use neighborhood, and I think that where the delineation happens in this amendment, I think is reasonable. And my read is that this is not necessarily in conflict with Amendment 2, and so it's, at least in committee, I'm going to be supporting both.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I see Councilmember Johnston. I'll go first to Councilmember Rutherford, who's on the committee, and then to Councilmember Johnston. Councilmember Rutherford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if this has been reviewed by planning, and otherwise could we hear from planning their thoughts in regard to this amendment?
Thank you. Planning, you're recognized.
Sure. So the planning staff represents the views of the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission did not place limitations on hotel use across the district.
Thank you. I'll go to Councilmember Johnston. Next, Councilmember Johnston, you're recognized.
Thank you. I guess my question would be, because I see there's a map with the different parcels of what the developer owns. My question would be, does the developer even know what all is planned for the certain, because, you know, when you're planning a neighborhood, there's going to be certain uses for the certain parcels where hotels would be appropriate in some and some not. So to predetermine what is appropriate in some parcels before the whole thing has planned may be premature. And so that would be my concern, is if you wanted to, I mean, I'm not interested, to me, I don't understand why we're limiting this more than we've limited the East Bank. But if you were talking about it, would it be a percentage instead of saying this parcel can have it and this cannot? Am I communicating that properly?
Yeah, I think we understand the question. I shared a similar question. I see Councilmember Coopin had his hands up, perhaps for an explanation. I'll go to you, Councilmember Coopin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate this discussion. I think we're all committed to making sure that this is a residential and mixed use and great neighborhood. So appreciate this discussion. I guess a question to the question, if I can ask the planning table, how many parcels would this allow for to be hotel usage? I know there's some metro and stuff in there. So how many parcels would this make or allow for hotel?
Planning, go ahead.
The way that the blocks and lots are structured is that it's really about blocks. It may not necessarily be development parcels. Those blocks could be further split up, and there's a lot of criteria that goes into that, and I'm not sure that I could just exactly answer it, because there's tower separation requirements, there's floor plate requirements, there's tower orientation requirements. There's a lot of different standards, and so it depends on how each block develops. I don't know that I could answer that.
I appreciate that. I know that's probably something not able to be gotten kind of in the moment. Is that something perhaps that for tomorrow night you could have some more information on, or at least some guidance on what that looks like?
The question is whether that's something we might have more guidance on tomorrow evening.
We can try.
Yeah, or just a sense would be great. And then just a quick follow-up question. Assuming that this gets passed and put and that kind of overlaid where it's permissible, let's say parcel E is not in this area that allows for hotel, but then there is a request from some owner of parcel E at some point to do a hotel there. Is this similar to like an MDHA redevelopment district, such that the council member at that point could bring before the council a lifting of that restriction, or how would that change over time if there's development interest that the body supports?
Planning, go ahead if you're able to speak to that.
That would require an amendment to the DTC, so it would be a rezoning process to amend the DTC.
Okay, so it's a text amendment.
Text amendment, similar to what's happening now, it would be an amendment to the DTC.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Amendment 3? I had one question myself to Councilmember Cab, and I think ultimately supportive of limitations on hotels and ensuring that what we're building goes primarily towards residential and we're not creating single-use neighborhoods. At the same time, considering whether there's a potential tension between limiting hotels on one side and attempting to not put additional pressure for short-term rental properties in the adjacent neighborhoods. I don't have an answer here, just a question on whether you think there's potentially any tension between, if we build hotels here, does that limit pressure for Airbnbs in the adjacent neighborhood? Curious if you have thoughts on that. Oh, sorry. Councilmember Cap, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think this actually allows quite a lot of hotels. The answer, I believe, is that there are 6 blocks on here that would be, but those are large blocks. They're not going to be development parcels. With some really critical street frontage, and these could be large hotels. I think there's actually quite a bit of hotel capacity in the amendment that I'm bringing. And then, we need to enforce our code on short-term rentals. We've been making some progress on that in District 6. It's a perennial problem, but, the demand for that is something that, we should be regulating as well. And so, it's hard to know 20, 30 years from now. But I think, if I may answer a little bit my colleague's question about why do we not do this by percentages, or alternatively, why are we doing this now? The reason to do it now is that this is when the legislation is proposed and passing. There is no other opportunity to do it. This is when we have an opportunity to do it. If you do it by percentage, that entails making an assumption about how much this is going to get built out and how big the buildings are going to be, that I don't think we're really in a position to do. There's too much unknown about how much will get built and when and how big the buildings will be to really do it by keys or to really do it by percentages. That was what I took away from discussion last week in the East Bank committee meeting, which is why at the planning staff's discussion, I landed on a sort of area restriction in order to make sure that this whole thing is not built out as hotels. In its current form, it really could be almost all hotels. That's worrisome to me. I know that's worrisome to my district. And there's quite a bit of hotel capacity in the amendment I've brought that should be able to absorb quite a lot. And by the way, we did limit hotels in the East Bank sub-district.
Thank you for that explanation. Any further discussion on Amendment 3? Seeing none, ask everyone that's in favor to say aye, and please raise your hand, please. All against, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. And any not voting? Oh. Okay, we recommend in favor, 6 in favor, 2 against, 2 not voting. Before we move on off the hotel motel use, there's one additional amendment addressing this, Amendment 1. Councilmember Coupin, are you wishing to move that for consideration by the committee? Okay, we are not. The next kind of bucket of issues that I had bucketed was amendments that address parking, starting with Amendment 4 by Councilmember Cap. Councilmember Cap, are you wishing to move Amendment 4 for consideration by the committee?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Okay,
Move Amendment 4.
Oh, you moved and seconded. Councilmember Cap, you're recognized for an explanation of the amendment, please.
Thank you. So, one of the biggest concerns that I've always had about the East Bank, and that is certainly a concern of the people of the District 6, is that we not induce a giant downtown's worth of car traffic into the East Bank. We have a lot of infrastructure work to do in the East Bank generally. We've all committed over and over, and the people of the city have voted pretty overwhelmingly with the transit referendum to start investing in alternative modes of transportation other than cars. But right now, this legislation has surface parking as an allowed use. I think it's reasonable to expect it's going to take a lot of time to develop and build buildings on these parcels. And surface parking is a great way to get some rent out of them in the meantime. But if that's what happens here, I think Mr. Sloan, who presented on behalf of this at committee last week, said that that would be a bad outcome. Well, I agree with that. I think that would be an extremely bad outcome because that's 47 acres potentially, and that's a lot of cars, and almost all of them are going to come through the Shelby exit, which is pretty congested as it is. So there's two big reasons why I'm concerned about that. The first is it's just bad for quality of life on the east side, where it's already pretty tough to get in and out, as anybody knows who wants to get in and out of East Nashville at rush hour, and this would make it quite a bit worse. The second is that it's just not the right way to build what could be a really, really exciting, amazing development on the East Bank with huge potential. I mean, we've got an amazing opportunity to really build exciting neighborhoods for Nashvillians in the East Bank. And so making those neighborhoods be dependent on and inducive of giant amounts of parking in the East Bank is really the wrong way to build a neighborhood. I think everybody involved knows that. And I worry a little bit that we're sort of sleepwalking into it. I think that is just the wrong way to build a neighborhood. It's not from scratch, but it's about as close to scratch as we're ever going to get. And it's at an amazing site with so much potential for our city. And we need to build it right. We need to build it multimodal. We need to build it walkable. In the short term, though, I think some surface parking down there will be helpful. I think it's actually a selling point for this because event traffic, the value proposition of the new stadium is that it's going to be programmed a lot more. And we haven't really solved parking and transportation issues in the East Bank. So I'm interested in making sure actually that there can be some surface parking in this site for the short term. So there's a few ways to handle this, and I've devised a way that I think threads it pretty well. So rather than banning surface parking, which I think would not give us the flexibility we're going to need over the next few years, I've proposed a limitation that no more than 20% of the site could be surface parking. If you think it's about 100, 120 cars per acre of parking, 10% of 47 acres, 20% of 47 acres, you're looking at about 1,000 parking spots. But to limit the use of those to event days when we're going to need them, rather than developing the habit of a bunch of folks parking in East Nashville who walk downtown or whatever for work, that's just, inducing car trips into the East Bank that we really shouldn't be encouraging. But phasing that use out after 5 years. So anything that exists there will, of course, be able to continue as a allowed non-conforming use, but no new surface parking lots could be laid down in 5 years. Hopefully, we've built some multimodal infrastructure in the East Bank by that time. So I think that sort of balances the equities here. And I've done quite a bit of work on arriving at those numbers based on how much parking you can get and how long I think it'll take to build a multimodal network down there. So I'd appreciate everybody's support of this. This is a really critical issue for the East Side.
Thank you for that explanation. Any discussion on Amendment 4? Councilmember Coopin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to my colleague to the east for bringing this. I think that we all agree that we don't want a giant surface parking area, and so I think it's important to restrict that. A question, I think, to the administration. I know that Metro is required under the Titans Stadium deal to provide, I believe, 2,000 spaces, and I know I think, Chair, you've got an amendment jumping ahead that addresses surface parking to be available to offset Metro's obligations. So I guess my question is, from the administration's perspective, if that's the right place to direct this, do we need those spaces? Is that something that's important to make available? If we don't allow for that, is that a problem? Just curious to that perspective.
Go to our special counsel for that.
Councilmember, there are, I'm sorry, could you please repeat the question?
So I guess my question is trying to understand that we have an obligation as a city to provide 2,000 spaces in some capacity, whether it's parking, I believe, that we build or that we provide access to in the area. And so my understanding is that potentially surface parking in the short term, as my colleague said, could be used to offset that pressure until garages are being built. So I guess my question is the city and the administration looking at this as something that's beneficial to fulfill those obligations? Is it 6 one, half a dozen the other? Like, how important is it to keep that available?
Is anyone from the administration wishing to speak on this point? Perhaps that's something we can get clarification with on the sidelines afterward.
Sure. And then I guess my second question, perhaps to the sponsor of the amendment, would be, and I appreciate the sentiment of looking at major events going on there. Would there be other uses that surface lot could be during that time? In the sense that I understand and in some senses support the idea of using it for event days, but if we think that it's beneficial for event days, most people are not going to operate a surface lot just event days and then leave it completely empty the rest of the time. So is there another use perhaps proposed that might be beneficial or that the districts to the east would appreciate, whether that be, I don't know, other event spaces or things like that?
Thank you. I'll go to the amendment sponsor for that.
Yeah, I'm certainly open to that conversation. I mean, the way it's written now is it basically events at the stadium or at TPAC, but yeah, there's certainly other things like the marathon or, I don't know exactly what they would all be, but I'd certainly be open to discussing other things. I think my intention with that limitation is that this not be an everyday parking space where we are basically telling everybody in Nashville, hey, come park in the East Bank. I think that is that's like almost one of the worst outcomes that could happen in the East Bank is to turn it into a giant parking lot.
Thank you, Councilmember. I share all of your concerns on a proliferation of surface parking. It induces additional car traffic and congestion that probably wouldn't exist otherwise. It's bad for walkability. It's bad for housing costs. It's bad for the environment and everything else. So I think limiting it in a brand new neighborhood is a very good use, and appreciate you bringing this amendment. I had one question, and I think I have an amendment addressing the same topic, which I think are slightly in conflict with each other. And for purposes today, we can recommend approval of contradictory amendments in committee, but there's a question for the sponsor on this. Amendment 15, which I brought, prohibits this as a standalone use contingent on it not being an abrogation of our legal obligations under the stadium parking facilities operations, which conceivably could be tomorrow, but could be earlier than June 30th, 2031. My concern with this is that if we allow it as a standalone use up to 2031, is there any incentive for them to build more surface parking in the meantime, which would then be grandfathered in after that time, or is it something we wish to prohibit them building any more of as soon as possible? So open to either way on that.
Yes, no, I think that's a great question, and it's important. It's an important consideration. That's why there is a limitation in this bill of 20% of the whole site only 20% of the site could ever be used for surface parking. Because yes, if we said simply phase it out after 5 years, any unbuilt parcel, 4.5 years from now, there's like a pretty strong economic incentive to just lay down a parking lot in the meantime until it gets developed. And that would be a perverse incentive that would achieve the opposite of what we hope to. So that's the purpose for the 20% overall limitation. I am certainly flexible on that number. If it should be smaller, I am open to that. That was a number I arrived at through consultation with some development folks and some folks with some traffic engineering expertise about what would sufficiently relieve event day pressure in the East Bank, but I am certainly open to discussion about tweaking those numbers and percentages. And as to pegging it to the Titans agreement, I may be mistaken, but I think that agreement lasts a really, really long time.
My thought on that is our agreement with them lasts a long time, but subject to, we agreed to provide, I understand, some certain degree of parking, which perhaps was not a great agreement for the city to make at that time. But as soon as we're able to limit parking, I would like us to limit it as much as possible. I think Councilmember Parker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with that aspect of the stadium deal, and there's nothing directly related. There's no contract with these property owners. There's no, we don't have a claim or a obligation to enter a contract with these property owners. This has nothing to do with that agreement. That agreement is between us and the Titans, and we're going to find a way to satisfy it.
Okay. Thank you. Any further discussion on Amendment 4? Seeing none, all in favor? Please raise your hands for me. Okay, any opposed? Any not voting? Recommend approval. Only got 9. Okay, I'm left. Recommend approval, 9 in favor, 0 against, 1 not voting. The next amendment I had on our agenda that relates to parking is Amendment 8, also brought by Councilmember Cap. Councilmember Park, are you wishing to move Amendment 8 for purposes of committee discussion? Moved. Do we have a second? Yeah. Moved and seconded. Councilmember Cap, you're recognized for an explanation of Amendment 8.
Yes, sorry, let me just get to it.
We're jumping all over the place.
Oh, no, that's great. Okay. Okay, so this is, there's a lot of text here, but it's actually relatively simple amendments. It has basically two purposes. What came out of the Planning Commission required a sort of, building, a habitable 15-foot wrap around the facade of any structured parking. The idea is to make sure that the streets are activated. That it's not, you're not walking down the street and looking at big structured parking, even if it's underneath a tower, which most of it is likely to be. So that liner was required to be 15 feet deep in the legislation before us. This amendment requires it to be 30 feet deep. And the rationale there is based on some discussion with folks who operate small businesses in particular and the development community, that 15 feet is really not deep enough for local businesses who are new businesses to sort of stand up and operate retail or, restaurants and stuff like that. 15 feet is more doable for like chains and takeout, things that are sort of better capitalized and able to operate in that smaller depth. So this is a way of making the street fronts active, but also supportive of, local businesses and activated street fronts. Of course, it doesn't require them to be local, but keeping it too shallow makes it harder for folks trying to start a new business to operate. And if you're thinking, sort of the cross section of the building, you're say it's a hotel or a residential use on top, the upper floors. A 15-foot buffer, that would mean that the units themselves would really be only 15 feet deep, and actually maybe even shallower than that because you need a hallway still in order to get to access those units. So 30-foot buffer is, in my understanding, a desirable standard. So that's one amendment. And the second is to require if any towers have primarily non-residential use, that their parking be underground. That's something that we require of the towers in the East Bank sub-district, and I think it's important for a couple reasons. One, activate the streetscape, make it more appealing, slightly disincentivizes parking, and it also incentivizes housing, because if you build a housing or a mixed-use building that is mostly housing, you don't have to underground your parking, so that makes it a little bit easier to build housing. That's the outcome that we want here, and this incentivizes that. So they're wrapped up in, those two provisions are wrapped up in this one amendment, and I ask your approval.
Thank you for that explanation. I know our colleagues from the planning department wished to speak on this one, so I'll go to our planning department for their thoughts.
Sure. So on each item, the 15-foot standard is the standard minimum throughout the DTC. This allows for flexibility of design of buildings. In actual projects that are built, we see a range, sometimes in the same building, of what that habitable liner turns out to be. The 15 feet gives flexibility of design. It doesn't mean that all of the liner, and we typically don't see that all of the liner is 15 feet, but setting that minimum is important to allow for architectural interest and flexibility of design when you get to setting the actual floor plates. So that is a standard across the DTC, the 15 feet, and we have found that it has worked well in other projects that we have reviewed, and it has given the needed flexibility to design those. Second, There are currently no sub-districts within the DTC that require all underground parking. The East Bank does require some parcels to go underground, but others are allowed to have above-grade parking. And so there are no sub-districts that require all underground. The current proposal for the East Bend is equally or more restrictive than what exists downtown in regards to parking. We looked at and thought about holistically the entire subdistrict and the range of standards that are included when drafting this subdistrict standards. And we also took into consideration environmental concerns around shallow water tables and floodplains that exist in this area when looking at underground versus above ground parking. Sometimes requiring underground versus fully lined above grade. The cost is really sort of the same. And so we consider, can you still get a good design even if you have above grade parking? And so we took all of that into consideration when we were drafting these standards. And so there was a lot of thought that went into where we landed. We do have some concern that there's another amendment that looks at removing the minimum, the required minimum height. And if you couple the removal of the required minimum height along with the allowance for above grade parking for residential uses, it could incentivize some lower scale forms of residential that may not necessarily be the best use of an urban land, like Texas wraps is sort of what they're traditionally called. And so if you allow above grade parking, remove minimum, then those two together could result in negative urban design outcomes.
Thank you for that explanation. Any further discussion on this amendment? I see Councilmember Coopin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. I'm pretty interested in making sure that small businesses can be part of this development. And so for the planning table, I'm curious what ranges you're seeing normally happen. And, you know, obviously we want architectural flexibility, but would there be a substantial downside to allowing those liners to be 30 feet versus 15 feet?
Sorry, planning, you're recognized.
I think that what we find is that allowing the 15 feet as the minimum just allows a flexibility of design. It doesn't mean that you're going to end up with 15 feet everywhere, but it does mean that something may narrow to 15 and then widen back out. It just allows a flexibility of design that we have found to be important in reviewing other projects.
Thank you. And then just one more question for planning. When you look at underground parking, and then you look at East Bank versus East Bend and water tables and things that are, have been discussed. Can you share? Is the water table under East Bank and East Bend different from each other? Are they the same? I guess I'm hearing that it's harder to do below ground on East Bend versus East Bank, but just curious to if that's the case and how we know that.
Sure. So there were some restrictions, or there was a part of East Bank where it said you have to be underground, and then the rest was allowed to be above ground. The constraints on this property in regards to floodplain is more than on the East Bank side, and so that coupled with sort of the shallow water table means that there's less opportunity, really. I mean, we took that into consideration, and we're always, our thinking on parking and the design of parking and undergrounding parking has definitely sort of evolved over time. But we find that if you can design it well with habitable liners, then above grade can still contribute to a really good design.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna probably go not voting on this. I do like the deeper requirement. I think it's hard to put a business in 15 foot. I hear the architectural interest, but I think that's beneficial. But I do have concerns about undergrounding parking or mandating it in areas where there's water table issues. So probably not going to be not voting on this one, but interested to hear some more discussion.
I saw Councilmember Benedict's hand up. You still wishing to speak? You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that I heard from a lot from my constituents is the riverfront and how it looks and just the whole area. So when I think about the East Bank Vision Plan from Jefferson Springs Street all the way through this parcel, I'm interested in creating some uniformity relative to parking in this particular case. And I also really like the idea that the sponsor brought up that, creating the demand for more residential units. That was also a huge concern that I heard from my constituents is we want to do all we can to keep this residential. And so by, limiting that parking in that way, I think that that's going to potentially deliver more of that rather than having a commercial where you'd have to go underground. I think that because it's so costly to go underground with the parking, that it would allow us, allow a developer to build something like that. I think there's one other thing, but that's it. I got to write things down. I'm at that age. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further discussion on Amendment 8? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hands. I have 5 in favor, all opposed? All not voting? Very good. Everyone that was opposed, please raise your hand again, please. I apologize. Okay. We recommend approval. 5 in favor, 2 against, 2 not voting. 8, 9, that's correct. Okay. The next item addressing parking was my own amendment, Amendment 15. Can I ask a committee member to move for approval, please? Moved and seconded. I can offer a brief explanation of this. I think Councilmember Cap already provided a adequate explanation of the detriments of surface parking. I think it's important that we limit this as much as we can, given the adverse effects it has on city design, on housing and affordability, on walkability, on climate and the heat island effect. So what this seeks to do is prohibit surface parking as a standalone use as soon as possible, which could be earlier than Councilmember Cap's earlier considered amendment does. I think I may ultimately vote in favor of Cap's amendment, but on the floor tomorrow, but wish to move this one for approval still here today. Any further discussion on Amendment 15? Councilmember Parker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I wanted to make the point again that, there's nothing about this property that's tied to our obligations with the football team under the stadium deal. I just want to be super clear about that.
Thank you. And without me opining as a lawyer on this, absent any legal obligation to the contrary, this would have the effect of prohibiting surface parking as a standalone use immediately in that instance. I saw Councilmember Coupin had his hand up as well. Councilmember Coupin, you're recognized.
Yeah, and I believe Councilmember Councilmember Parker has substantially more knowledge on that deal than I do. And just that's kind of where my question was coming from. Was I recognize that the deals aren't attached. When in previous discussions, I had heard that one of the things Metro was going to look for is parking opportunities in adjacent development sites to offset their obligation until they could get a structured garage up. So again, that's kind of where I was trying to understand more, and hopefully someone could maybe bring that information before the meeting tomorrow. But again, that's outside my purview.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further discussion on Amendment 15? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Any not voting? Recommend approval 1 in, recommend approval 1 in favor, 4 against, 4 not voting. 5 not voting. Recommend against approval 1 in favor, 4 against, 5 not voting. The next large bucket I had is infrastructure. Generally, started with Amendment 7 by Councilmember Cap. Councilmember Cap, are you wishing to move Amendment 7 for purposes of committee discussion today? Oh, sorry, Councilmember Cap, you're recognized.
Yes. So moved on Amendment 7.
Moved and seconded. You're recognized for an explanation once you have it in front of you.
Chair, we're on 7.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So again, this is to address one of the big concerns I have about this, which is making sure that we are sufficiently dealing in a rigorous way with traffic impacts from this development and encouraging investments here to go toward safe, walkable, multimodal streets. So this amendment requires NDOT to do a traffic study of the whole area by the end of this calendar year. And to renew that every 5 years thereafter. We haven't historically done things like this, but I think it's time. This is going to be years and decades of building and construction and investment and infrastructure. So a traffic study now is great, but it's not going to tell us a whole lot about what this area is going to look like in 15 or 30 or 50 years from now, when these developments will be continuing. You know, the Gulch, as we've discussed frequently, is sort of still being built out. And I think that deal was done when I was in high school, when it was just a big old gravel parking lot and really looked like a gulch. So we know that this is going to be a long-term thing. And the benefit to doing these sort of area studies, these MMTAs based on the whole area, is that when new buildings are proposed or coming online and going through the review process, Metro can be rigorous about what we understand those impacts are likely to be and can require investment in infrastructure for walkable multimodal streets, which is a goal that we all share, at least notionally, and this just makes it real. So I urge approval.
Thank you for that explanation. I see Councilmember Johnson's hand was up first. Councilmember Johnson, you're recognized.
Who would pay for that?
Councilmember Cap?
NDOT. I mean, NDOT, I'm asking NDOT to do it the same way they do traffic studies on any
So
other.
NDOT would pay for it now, and they would pay for it every 5 years from now? And are they correct?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, we could ask if we have any relevant folks here to talk about how that could be administered, but yes, it would be NDOT.
I see planning. I don't know if you can speak on behalf of NDOT in this context, but I'll go to you if you're able to speak on this.
Certainly. So I'm definitely not going to speak on behalf of NDOT, but I would say that that we anticipate that they may add a fiscal note to this if asked, that there is likely a cost associated with this.
And I would say
a recurring cost.
Yeah, I would say if you're going to do that with the proximity to the East Bank and everything related to that, that if you're going to do that, I would expand it through the entire East Bank, since there's so much connectivity there, and so that fiscal note is going to grow. If you're going to do it for East Bend, it should be done for East Bank. Is that fair?
If that's a question for me, I think that makes a fair amount of sense, and I think it makes sense probably to harmonize them together. It's not something we can achieve in this as an amendment to this legislation. But yeah, traffic impacts are a really big concern for folks on the east side, and I think we need to be effectively planning to mitigate them and build better connections across the river. I think that's a huge priority for folks on the east side.
My request would be to defer until you could get a fiscal note, because you can't require something of a department without a fiscal note before you have that built into their budget, certainly if you're going to require that on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Council Member. I see we do have a representative from NDOT here today. I wonder if you may be willing to speak on this. I know as part of any development, NDOT is conducting similar studies. I wonder if you anticipate this being a significant additional burden or fiscal cost for the city. You're recognized. If you can introduce yourself, please.
Chris Mitchell, Council Liaison for NDOT. As of right now, yes, it would be a burden. I would like to work with the council member to kind of get a fiscal note that we can kind of defend, rather than just having a vague amount.
Councilmember,
I'm totally open to that. I mean, these amendments were filed on Friday for discussion today, and I think this is an extremely useful area to discuss. I think the people ought to know what a proposal like this is likely to cost. I think it'll be well worth it, but certainly that should be part of the analysis that we're discussing publicly I am not asking for a deferral of this legislation right now, but if we think we need one in order to do this right, that certainly is okay with me.
I'm saying a deferral for this particular amendment that could be applied later on if you're asking for something, certainly if it's being applied to the East Bank.
See Councilmember Coopin. Councilmember Coopin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm actually very, very supportive of this one. I think one of the number one concerns that I've heard, both from out east and my constituents throughout downtown and into the north neighborhoods, Jefferson Street, for example, is the traffic impact of the East Bank development as a whole. I think Councilman Johnston has a great point about making it for the East District overall and the East Bank overall. So I guess a question, maybe administration or maybe somebody else. We obviously have stood up an East Bank Development Authority. This would be an East Bank traffic study. Is that something that could be put under the purview of East Bank Development Authority to pay for and address? Because it does seem pertinent that every so many years we're studying how traffic is impacting this area.
There's a question for the administration. I don't know if Mr. Rosenberg, if that's something you're able to speak to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question is whether the East Bank Development Authority can pay for a traffic study every 5 years.
Potentially. Could this potentially live within the East Bank Development Authority versus NDOT, but EBDA in partnership with NDOT doing this every 5 years?
They could there could be a discussion about them entering into that kind of partnership. It's not something we can obligate them to, and I don't know what their capacity or interest is in it.
And then just a second question, if I might, I guess to planning. There was a bridge proposed at one point in the Imagine East Bank plan, and just curious where that is in discussion. I know it seems like it's faded away, but as we look at traffic impact in this East Bend area, I know that bridge was something that was considered to offload some traffic. So just curious where that is, and would that be considered as part of this study?
Planning, you're recognized if you're able to speak to that.
Sure. So that extension is no longer part of the Major and Collector Street plan.
Thank you. That's all I got.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you as well to Councilmember Cap for bringing this. I think this is a good amendment, and I think conducting it at 5-year increments makes sense. And, eventually such transportation analysis is not going to be required, at which time we can terminate as needed the recurring nature of the analysis. And I particularly like that the amendment includes recommendations that respects Nashville's modal hierarchy. And I think it's important that this be part of it, that we continue to prioritize walking, biking, and public transit over single passenger vehicles. So grateful for Councilmember Cap for bringing this, and we'll be voting in support of it as well myself today and tomorrow. Did I see your hand up to speak further on this amendment?
Only to indicate openness to discussion of, discussing with NDOT or the East Bank Development Authority. I'm certainly open to that discussion. I'm not asking for a deferral tonight, but if we need a deferral to get this right, I'm certainly not going to oppose that.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Amendment 7? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hands. Keep your hands up, please. That is 9 in favor. Any opposed? Any not voting? Recommend approval, 9 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 not voting. 1 not voting, pardon me. The next infrastructure-themed amendment we have is Amendment 12 by Councilmember Parker. Councilmember Parker, are you looking to move Amendment 12 for purposes of committee discussion? Oh, sorry, Councilmember Parker, you're recognized.
Yes, Chair, I'd like to move the amendment.
Moved and seconded. Go to you for an explanation, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, given the fact that this is a very substantial expansion of entitlements in a brownfield area that doesn't even have sort of an underlying inadequate street grid, which is what we have on the metro side of the overall East Bank. I thought it was really important that we have as much kind of public visibility and as many touch points into that major end collector street plan amendment process as possible. So what this amendment does is it would require a recommendation of both the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committees and the Vision Zero Advisory Committees before the major and collector street plan for this area goes to the Planning Commission. You'll also see in the amendment, I put kind of some guardrails, for lack of a better term. There is a shot clock, so if either entity, for whatever reason, cannot come to agreement on a recommendation or does not submit a recommendation within 60 days of receiving the proposed amendment, that recommendation would no longer be required for the Planning Commission to consider it. The other one that's in there, if those entities are no longer in existence and there are not clear successor entities defined, we fall back on the charter mandated Traffic and Parking Commission. So there will always be an entity that can review this, make recommendations prior to it going to the Planning Commission. And I would just ask for y'all's support. This is, again, starting from scratch. There's less there in terms of infrastructure than we have even on the metro side. I initially had, folks, I think a theme of some of the questions from council members that are present at the committee meeting today has been, why is this a thing for East Bend? And, I did actually propose this for the entire East Bank subdistrict, but I was informed by our special counsel that really what we're looking at with this legislation is the East Bend. And so that's why it doesn't apply to the broader East Bank DTC area, just the sub-district that we're actually considering the parameters of today. So I'm happy to answer any questions about it.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Cap, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. When I read this amendment, I was really impressed with the creativity behind it. I mean, we've discussed how do we ensure that we respect multimodal hierarchy and actually build these streets the way that we keep saying we intend to. And so Councilmember Parker found a really creative way that involves public input to help ensure that to happen. So I really love this amendment. When I read it, I'm definitely supportive of it.
Thank you. Did I see Councilmember Coopin? You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair, and I echo Councilmember Cap's comments. Very, very creative and well done on this amendment. I think it's really important to make sure these voices are heard throughout this process. Sounds like maybe at some point a East District guidance plan for with a couple of these might be in our future, but since this is just East Bend conversation, I'm very supportive of this. I think this is great and appreciate my colleague bringing it.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Amendment 12? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Any not voting? Okay. How many? Okay, we recommend approval, 10 in favor, 0 against, 0 not voting on Amendment 12. Next amendment I have in the infrastructure bucket is Amendment 14 by myself. Do we have a motion? Moved and seconded. Brief explanation is this requires the Metropolitan Planning Department to provide a written report to the council on amendments to our major and collector street plan process for this East Bend subdistrict. That report includes details such as right-of-way standards, street classifications, provisions for pedestrian facilities, bike infrastructure, transit accommodations, and how it relates to vehicle lanes. That report has to be sent to every council member. The objective of this is to continue to draw these infrastructure considerations in the major collector street plan out into the public space and ensure the council is kept up to date and apprised of these developments, and ensure that we're continuing to adhere to our modal hierarchy to prioritize walking, biking, and public transit, as well as Vision Zero principles as we build and design our infrastructure in this space. Any discussion on this amendment? Councilmember Parker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I'm rising in support of this amendment. I think it's really helpful as I'm really confident in our planning department's ability to have like a really strong process for this major and collector street plan update for this area. Lots of public engagement, but I do think it's super helpful to kind of have something that we can point to say, here is the process spelled out for everyone who's interested in participating in that process. So I think this is a good amendment and I'll be voting in support of it.
Thank you. Councilmember Cooper, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I was really excited the other day to walk down a street downtown under scaffolding where there was work being done on a building and the sidewalk was still open. And I appreciate, Chair, you including language about the any construction being done to keep right-of-way open. I think as we grow into a big city and as we continue to do developments on a consistent basis, we need to figure out ways to not block right-of-way as we do that. So appreciate that, and I'm in support.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Any not voting? Recommend approval, 10 in favor, 0 against, 0 not voting. Just bear with me one moment. Now moving on to other amendments. Bear with me. The first other additional amendment to consider is Amendment 5 by Councilmember Cap. Councilmember Cap, are you wishing to move this amendment for purposes of committee consideration?
Yes, move approval.
Moved and seconded. You're recognized for an explanation.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot about this. We've discussed much in the various committees that have touched this about there's a parcel here that's eligible for a height bonus for the achievement of architectural excellence, but the definition that is currently pending is, I would describe it more as architecturally adequate. It's things like, sustainable materials and addresses the street and addresses the river. I hope we're doing that with everything. I hope we're doing site-specific quality design everywhere. So I thought that if we want to give incentives to architectural excellence, we ought to beef up that definition a little bit. And so this amendment just substitutes some language to achieve truly excellent architectural design. Of course, the DRC, or depending on what amendments get passed, the design review committee relevant to this will be reviewing this, but this gives them standards against which to review it, so that we're looking at dignified architecture that is something you're going to come around the corner and be proud of, to be in Nashville. So I urge approval.
Thank you for that explanation. Any discussion on Amendment 5? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Any not voting? Recommend approval, 9 in favor, 1 against, 0 not voting. Next amendment we have to consider is Amendment 6 by Councilmember Cap. Councilmember Cap, are you wishing to move this amendment for consideration?
Move Amendment 6.
Moved and seconded. You're recognized for an explanation.
Thank you. So as everybody knows, the use table is pretty complicated for the DTC area, and it's broken down not by sub-district, but by use area. So there's an east use area. Unsurprisingly, a stadium arena use is permitted in the east use area because we've got a giant stadium in the east use area, but this just clarifies that we can't do stadiums in the currently titled East Bend sub-district.
Thank you for that explanation. Councilmember Coopin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair, and appreciate my colleague bringing this for discussion. I guess I'd be curious as to the why. We know that there's no active deal, but for example, Major League Baseball has been discussed, and we understand there's a lot of discussion around public financing for private projects that we obviously don't want to get into today. But if that were a potential use that was brought forward, I'd be curious why that would not fit there when this has been one of the sites that have been floated before.
Well, that's never been discussed with me, and everything I've heard about this is that it's supposed to be a residential neighborhood for Nashvillians. I don't think we're trying to build, or at least I think the people of Nashville don't want us to build any more stadiums. I think if a great deal comes along, we can obviously amend a sub-district if a future council ever wanted to do that. These are susceptible to amendment, but I am a little concerned to hear that there's contemplation of building another stadium in this area. That's never been part of the discussion or proposal that any residents of Nashville have ever heard of, and I've certainly never heard that being contemplated here. Everything that we've been discussing and that the investment team has promised is a neighborhood filled with housing. That's what I support, and I think we ought to legislate that.
Thank you. We'll go back to Councilmember Coop.
I appreciate that. Well, to be clear, that's been in multiple news articles, completely, again, unrelated to this project. It's not something I've heard in relation to this project. It's not something that I've heard in relation to this deal, but there have been news articles in the past, and I was just using that as an example, or an arena or a music venue. We have multiple wonderful mixed-use neighborhoods developing. I think of Nashville Yards, which has the Pinnacle as a music anchor with office and residential and family programming and winter markets and ice skating and pickleball. And so to me, I guess I just feel like I'm unsure why this would need to come now. Again, there'd be obviously a lot of other considerations on, again, stadium, arena, and I'm just not sure why that would need to be restricted on this property at this time.
Thank you. I'll go back to Councilmember Cap one more time.
The reason it needs to be is because every promise that's been made by the proponents of this is that it's going to be a neighborhood. That's the reason that this needs to come out. If we're legislating this, it needs to uphold the promise that the folks proposing this have made, which is that it's going to be a neighborhood. This doesn't prohibit pickleball or outdoor entertainment. There's different uses in the use table for outdoor entertainment and stuff like that. This does not take this out. This takes out stadium/arena. The people of East Nashville have quite a bit of concern about this. Those concerns are addressed through these amendments. If we're going to start telling them a stadium is coming to the scrapyard, I think this is going to become a very different conversation, and I strongly urge us to remove this use from the sub-district.
Thank you. I'll go first to Councilmember Parker and then Councilmember Benedict.
My comments were already echoed. I'm not going to repeat them.
Thank you. Councilmember Benedict, you're recognized.
Wow, that there's any opposition to this is challenging for me. If we were to put another block stadium situation on the East Bank that sat empty, even if it was baseball, it sat empty half of the year, I think East Nashville would really feel ripped off that they didn't get the neighborhood they've been promised. And I think one of the challenges that I've had throughout this process is the question, is that in the bill? And this is an opportunity for us to put something in the bill that, we've talked about and been promised. And now we have the opportunity to say, let's put this in the bill. So I'm completely supportive of Councilmember Cap's amendment here, and I ask that my colleagues join me.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further discussion on Amendment 6? Councilmember Coop, you're recognized.
Can I ask the planning table to describe a little bit more what the arena and convention center use is? So for example, something like the Pinnacle, would that be not allowed in that, or is arena talking about a much bigger structure?
Go to the planning department for an explanation.
So it's not defined by the zoning code, nor is theater. And so I think we would have to consult with the zoning administrator. When terms are not defined, it is up to the zoning administrator to make that determination.
So if I'm hearing correctly, it is not defined in the code, so we don't know what this is actually prohibiting or not prohibiting by removing the use absent a judgment from the zoning administrator.
The use is listed in the use table, but the use is not defined, and the code is specific to say how you interpret uses that are not defined. But that decision generally falls to the zoning administrator, and I would not want to speak for him.
Thank you. And a question for myself, that's not unusual, the land.
No, there's actually quite a few uses that are in the land use table that are not defined in the zoning code.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Evans, you're recognized.
Thank you for recognizing me. I'm just listening to this discussion, really befuddled, because outside of downtown, the city cannot afford another stadium or arena. And so this is one of the amendments, I would vote for this a million times, just because I think it's so important to have that clear definition. If a future council wants to have that conversation in the future, I think that's relevant, but not for this body in this term.
Thank you. Councilmember Benedict, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. So I think we could all agree, and I think any future zoning administrator would agree, that a stadium entertainment venue is not a residential location. It's just not, inherently not the use is for people to live. I mean, if we had people living in a baseball stadium, I'd like to see it, right? That's not residential use. So again, fully support this amendment. Hope that my colleagues come on board with it.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Amendment 6? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Any not voting? Recommend approval, 7 in favor, 2 against, 2 not voting. Next amendment we have in this other bucket is Amendment 9 by Councilmember Benedict. Councilmember Benedict, are you wishing to move Amendment 9?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. You're recognized for an explanation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So what this amendment does is it creates an East Bank Design Review Committee within the DTC. The DTC today, across the river on the west side, or the West Bank, there's a downtown review committee made up of folks from 8 organizations, including 3 of those are appointed by the mayor, the Metropolitan Council, and the Planning Commission. The others are the Downtown Neighborhood Association, the Historical Commission, the Nashville Downtown Partnership, and then also the Civic Design Center and the Chamber of Commerce. What I'm suggesting that we do is remove the Nashville Downtown Partnership and the Downtown Neighborhood Association. I believe that what it's called is actually the Urban Residents Association, and that's been based in downtown. And then also historic. There's nothing that are historical buildings within the East Bend sub-district here. So I think that removing them and then replacing them with an architect from Urban Land Institute, somebody from the future East Bend Neighborhood Association. If this is going to be residential, then I think that there'll be a neighborhood association on this side of the river, and then also somebody from the Casey Place Resident Association, which will have a huge impact. It's just on the other side of the interstate and is going to have a lot of engagement. Shelby Avenue is their exit. So that's the goal. I did speak with the Director of Planning about this on Friday, and she was supportive. So I would ask that my colleagues support as well.
Thank you, Councilmember. I know this is one our colleagues at Planning wish to speak on as well. Planning, is this one you wish to provide comments on? You're recognized.
Sure. So first, I want to just start by saying that we do understand the desire to provide for new or broader input, given that this is creating a new neighborhood from whole cloth. And there's a few ways to think about it, and I think that we have discussed those. There's a few ways to think about how to do that. One way that you could do it is as proposed, but you could also look at or consider adjusting the existing downtown code DRC, where, for instance, for projects that are within the East Bank area, that you replace the Urban Resident Association member with a resident member from this area. To the extent that we can be efficient in how we review projects, we do think that that's worth considering. There would be more administration, more meetings, more work on our end to sort of formulate and operate any new design review committee. And so there are different ways to think about it, and there could be a way that you can think about it by modifying how the current DRC operates in this area.
Councilmember Benedict, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to make sure that the Director of Planning shared with me that she was supportive of this. Did I understand from the planning table that that was contradictory? She supported the amendment as it's written.
I certainly don't want to speak for the director, given that she's not here. I wanted to say that there are several ways that you could do this, and to the extent that we think about efficiency of structure or the existing DRC, that we suggest that maybe that be considered as well.
Okay, colleagues, I would just suggest that we listen to what the read what the amendment says, and Director Kempf and I spoke about this on the phone on Friday. Texted about it, and this is supported. So I would again ask, the East Bank is different from downtown. We're talking about a residential neighborhood. Downtown has a ton of entertainment. While this could be done in a different way, there are other design review committees around the city. And so this is a a different area than downtown. And so my ask for the body here is to approve this design review committee because it's for a different neighborhood than what downtown is. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cap, you're recognized.
Just want to say this is another creative idea that I loved when I read it. East Side doesn't want downtown jumped across the river, and I think we don't want the party district jumped across the river. We understand the stadium deal, lots of things are flowing from that, and the speed of it is something we're not crazy about, but I think this is a great way to get East Side consideration into downstream design decisions that I think will pay big dividends for how this works for East Side neighborhoods. So I love this idea. I'm very supportive of it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further discussion? Councilmember Allen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the distinction of just the differences in I think, priorities and viewpoints that would need to be represented in this new neighborhood. I'd like to hear just a little bit more sort of about logistics and where it should be described if we as a body feel strongly that we want to ensure that it's not just the same DRC that's currently making decisions. How, to explore the other methods that you talk about. I mean, I can sort of see it sort of overlapping subcommittees is what you're describing. It sounds like where perhaps some of the residents from this side of the river would represent that since they've got some experience, but you wouldn't necessarily bring the Broadway folks to be part of that. If that is what we want to accomplish, it seems like it needs to be written down somewhere. Could we hear how that might be immortalized without, separately from what this does in terms of setting up, without adding, I guess, additional administrative burden on y'all?
I'll go to the planning department for a response to that query.
So the amendment as written would create a new DRC, and so if this is passed, then that is what we would be reacting to. We would not be readjusting the existing DRC. I was suggesting that there could be different ways that you think about design review on the East Bank.
And I guess if I might follow up on that question, if we wanted to create overlapping subcommittees, I'll just use that as my starting point. Does that, do we need to codify that through this method, or is that something that would necessarily flow from the existing downtown code? I mean, that would a slightly different amendment accomplish a less administratively burdensome version of what we've been asked for?
Go ahead, planning, if you're able to speak to that.
I'm not sure that I can speak to that. I can just react to the amendment as filed.
Okay.
I had just offered that there could be a way to look at the existing DTC, but that is not on the table.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to our counsel for just alerting me in light of this amendment and how it may interact with the Planning Commission's approval of this and whether this needs to be reconsidered. Can you opine whether this would need to be re-referred to the Planning Commission if the bill was to be amended with this?
Yes, Chair. This amendment not only regulates the East Bend subdistrict, but also regulates the East Bank subdistrict. Therefore, this is beyond the scope of what was considered and would require re-referral to planning, based on my understanding and based on my conversations with the Department of Law.
Thank you for that explanation. Councilmember Parker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. So I am very supportive of this idea, but in light of Special Counsel's comments, I would suggest that maybe this be a piece of standalone legislation that the council member might move forward if it does not advance as an amendment to this.
Thank you. Councilmember Benedict, you're recognized.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Council. That is, I guess the other option would be that passed by 27 votes here, or would it actually have to go back? Not suggesting that that's what route I'll go. I'm just curious, if it didn't go back to planning, would it then make it a disapproved bill? That's gymnastics we don't need to do.
Okay.
Why don't I go ahead? I'm going to withdraw this, and I'll look at standalone legislation for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Bear with me. The next amendment we have considered in this general category is Amendment 10 by Councilmember Benedict. Councilmember Benedict, are you wishing to move this for consideration?
Yes, please. Move approval.
Moved. We have a second? Moved and seconded. You're recognized for an explanation.
Thank you, Chair. So this amendment, pulling it up here. Okay, so this amendment changes the heights within the sub-district. So what this does is the district today between South 2nd Street, and it's proposed, so I'm just going to refer to it though as South 2nd Street for ease here. The current proposal allows 40 stories north of that between South 2nd Street and the interstate. The next band between 2nd Street and East Bank Boulevard is, I'm proposing 30 stories down from 30 and in some cases 40 stories. The following band, I have everything reduced from either mostly 40 stories, but also 30 stories. But the band between East Bank Boulevard and Davidson Street to move almost everything down to 20 stories. I think that one in particular is important because as you cross I-24, what's not on the map here is as Davidson Street goes towards Shelby Park. Last term we passed a plan, I believe it's an SP, but anyway, it's a plan that goes down Davidson Street, and the last parcel just on the other side, well, the first parcel on the other side of 24 as a part of that SP is 20 stories. So to me, it makes sense as you're coming down 20 stories that you're heading to the same site, and when you stay between Davidson and East Bank, that would be the goal. West of Davidson Street, we reduced the heights even further there. The parcel at the corner of Davidson Street and KVB there, in the committee meeting, I think on Monday, we talked about the height of KVB right there, and it's 6 stories. So that's got it limited to 6, but it also, that's the River Gateway. So that there is legislation that Councilmember Cap covered as, that we've passed in this committee so far relative to that one. So the goal here that I hear from the community in Inglewood, and folks drive this way, they get off at Shelby, cut up, go through Shelby Park to get to Riverside Drive, and this is a big area that they go through, and they're concerned what they want to do is see step downs as they go towards the river. So when we think about floor plates and what the design review committee is going to do relative to how the buildings, you know, are angled and such, on the parcels, they also want to make sure that, you know, as you go closer to the river, you're looking at the west side views, the downtown views. So you're not looking at just another block building. So again, thinking about the neighborhood, thinking about the quality of life and what people would like to see, that's what I was targeting with this change to this diagram.
Thank you for that explanation. I know this is one the planning department wished to provide comments on as well. Go to the planning department.
Sure. So the planning department, planning staff, as we thought through the drafting of this sub-district, we gave careful consideration to allowed heights elsewhere in the East Bank and also in surrounding areas. We considered and looked at the Imagine East Bank, and we formulated the standards around that. But when we think about the standards, we think about them holistically, and we don't just think about height, okay? That's one standard that's within the sub-district, but that's not inclusive of everything that's considered. So other things that are included are floor plates, tower separation, ground plane activation, facade articulation, all of these different things combine together to create what is a good urban design. So we don't think about height in a silo. We we actually at the department value the ground plane activation more than height, because as a pedestrian that's walking through the area or a bicyclist that's riding through the area, the ground plane is what you are going to feel more acutely than the height. And so that's why we value that and think about that. We also looked at this in regards to a ground-up neighborhood and the amount of infrastructure, street network, blocks that are required, along with open space that's being provided throughout this sub-district. And so all of those things are taken together when you're looking at the equation. It's not pulling one element out. It's holistic view. And so it was carefully considered and carefully crafted, taking all of those things into consideration. And that's what the Planning Commission recommendation was.
Thank you for that explanation. Any discussion on this amendment? Councilmember Allen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an area that I've had questions about, specifically with regard to the KBV Gateway. I was on the Planning Commission when we approved a very tall building right on the river, partly because they said they were going to do great ground plane activation. And so my question is, how do we guarantee that, and who is the judge of that? Because that particular building now, when you walk down First Avenue on it, there's a gate, and you can't access that building from the ground plane. You have to walk around to Second Avenue and go into a restaurant or something to even get to that. So it doesn't invite you from First Avenue to take advantage of what that building did. And we allowed that because it was supposed to be really great amenities for First Avenue. And I've been disappointed in what ended up being there. So how can we ensure that if we give a really, to me, really big entitlement that has the potential to then take benefit away from the building one block away from the river by not enabling them to enjoy the river view, how do we ensure that really is a great ground plane activation?
Yeah. Go to planning for an explanation of that.
Sure, and in speaking to Riverview, I will say that the orientation of buildings and the way that we've thought about the massing of the buildings and how they relate to the river also has to do with sort of porosity. And so it's not just the height, it's how they're oriented, right? So as to ground plane activation, that doesn't, it can look different at different points on a building. It doesn't always necessarily mean that I, as a pedestrian, can walk into that building, but what it means is that I'm not walking along a blank facade. And so is it a patio area? Maybe for parts of the frontage, that is what it is, but it's still activated and it's still creating a lively ground plane, even if it's not that I walk in from that side, right? And so there's different ways to think about activation. It might just be that there is glass and storefronts that create interest along that ground plane.
Thank you for that explanation. Any further discussion on this amendment? Councilmember Parker.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I'm really struggling with this one. I understand the desire to kind of mirror the step down and whatnot that we have on the Metro side, but as planning explained, I think that thinking about the totality of circumstances that the department took into consideration as I worked with the applicant here, specifically, I mean, really heavy on my mind is just the tremendous infrastructure costs that are going to have to be expended to build out the infrastructure necessary for this. You know, I assume that's a fairly tight balance that this plan assumes. You know, we've talked in other committee meetings somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 million estimate. That's my estimate. That's not coming from a development team or anyone else, but a tremendous amount of infrastructure to get the road network, the horizontal, everything for this site. And so I don't think I can support this amendment today based on those needs for the site and the fact that I think the planning department worked very hard to find a balance with the applicant.
Thank you, Councilmember Parker. Councilmember Benedict, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. So I brought this amendment because I received a ton of feedback about this zoning bill after second reading. And this, I know that there were a couple of community meetings, and I know this was at Planning Commission. That was during a time that about 14,000 District 7 residents didn't have power and were freezing in their homes. So we had a really hard time learning about this until later. So this is in response to all of the concerns that they brought forth. And so I needed to, be their voice and bring this forth. I understand whatever this body may choose to do. I understand, and I know planning put a lot of time and effort into this work with the investors here. And so I just wanted to, make sure that my constituents' voices were heard since they weren't able to make it to any of those meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further discussion on this amendment? I'll just say I appreciate the thought behind this. I think ultimately on my side, I agree with my councilmember or colleague from District 5. A lot of thought and balance has gone into Heights here and how it interacts with every other aspect of this, including infrastructure and open space. So unfortunately, this is not an amendment I will be able to support as well, for the reasons Councilmember Parker also detailed. Any further or discussion on this one? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hands. All opposed? Any not voting? We do not recommend approval. 2 in favor, 7 against, 1 not voting. The next amendment we have in this general category is Amendment 11, also by Councilmember Benedict. Councilmember, are you wishing to move this amendment?
Yes, please, I move it.
Moved. Do we have a second? Moved and seconded. You have an explanation, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is a simple amendment that changes all references to the East Bend back to Shelby's Bend. Looking at the East Bank Vision Plan that was worked on for almost 2 years and has been in place for since 2022, so 3.5 years, I guess, since right now. This is referred to as Shelby's Bend. I think calling it Shelby's is important placemaking for the East Nashville community. We have Shelby Avenue at this exit. We have Shelby Park. We have the Shelby Bottoms Greenway. And John Shelby is somebody who, Edgefield was created because of John Shelby. Boscobel Street is because he had a home named Boscobel for one of his daughters. His daughter, one of his daughters founded St. Anne's Episcopal Church, which is a block from this exit. So I'm looking at from River North all the way through the East Bank to Shelby's Bend. I think that it makes sense. What we've sold the public is what's the names that are on that. And it also, the other thing is people have been very confused, and I think we've seen it in many of the emails that we've seen. Is this the East Bank? No, the East Bend. I mean the East Bank. No, the East Bend. And so it's a confusing name for people too. And as we develop things over the next 30, 40 years, I think people are going to continue to be confused by that. So this is simple. It just brings that name back. Thank you.
Thank you for that explanation. I see Councilmember Coopin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I would be curious to ask the Planning Department where the East Bend name came from and what the implications would be of changing it at this late stage.
Planning, you're recognized.
I don't think that we necessarily have a view on this. There was some discussion around there was a desire from the investment team for it to not be tied to John Shelby. But I don't think it matters. I don't think that we have a view. This is a political call.
Councilmember Cap, you're recognized.
Yeah, I do want to chime in to say that East Bend, East Bank, the East Point that's about to come online, it's a logjam of confusing names, and I can't tell you how much time I've spent at community meetings drawing a map with my hand to describe the difference between East Bend and East Bank and so forth. So I think reduction of confusion here is a good idea.
Thank you. One question myself for the sponsor, and I have no thoughts on what a good name would be for this site. I do have concerns about the specific individual, John Shelby. He was a large slaveholder, held a large number of enslaved persons, pledged human beings as collateral for loans, gave human beings as gifts to other people. I don't see him as a person who we should be celebrating or memorializing in this context. I mean, I understand he may have been influential in the development of East Nashville. Question whether he's somebody that we should be memorializing in this context. I wonder if the sponsor may have any thoughts on that.
Thank you, Chair. So somebody brought that, actually somebody brought that to my attention today as far as that. I'm familiar with his history with the neighborhood. The neighborhood's not familiar with John Scobey per se, but Edgefield wouldn't exist without him. I gave a little color on that history here moments ago. But Shelby Park, when you think of Shelby Park, you think of East Nashville. When you think of Shelby Bottoms, when you think of Shelby Avenue, the Shelby Bridge, those are quintessential East Nashville things, regardless of where the name Shelby comes from. The brand Shelby is something that's important to the neighborhood. I also would say if we're going to talk about changing the names of things because someone was a slave owner, and as horrible and horrific and just awful that is in the South, I would say we need to look at Hermitage and Old Hickory. I think that there's areas around the city that we could rename things that need to be renamed because of who the person was. I think in this case, Shelby's Bend is appropriate. And additionally, I mean, it goes back to, this is what we've called it for 4 years now, in addition to the brand Shelby being important to the neighborhood.
Thank you for that. I saw Councilmember Coop, and then I'll go to Councilmember Johnson afterward.
Thank you, Chair, and I could not agree more with Councilman Cap that the East Bank, East Point, East this, East that is getting a little complicated to explain to constituents, and would love to have distinguishing names. That being said, I struggle at this, again, this late stage to come up with a name change. I appreciate that Shelby is a great suggestion for that project. I imagine that my constituents who do live in this district and are starting to live in this area, and constituents that live just across the river, right in this downtown core, may have some suggestions for names. So before we in the 11th hour just change a name, which again also doesn't necessarily change the name of the project, right? A developer or investor could call it whatever they wanted, even if the downtown code plan says something. So I guess I appreciate the suggestion. Chair, I share your concerns. It was brought to my attention as well that, obviously a very influential person, but also had some concerning history. And I recently renamed on the East Bank Wasiauto Park from Cumberland Park, again, due to that problematic history. So I guess, I'd be opposed to this at this time. If we want to look at a different name for this site, I'm very open to that conversation, but I'd like to have that as a conversation that my constituents can participate in as well.
Thank you for that. And I'll go to Councilmember Johnston in just one moment, but I've been advised that the Budget Committee, which meets after us, is losing quorum, and so we have a number of additional amendments. So just a request to the committee that we move briskly as we fully consider every amendment. With that, I'll go to Councilmember Johnson.
Well, I just wanted to say, we have a developer here that has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in this site, and we talked about branding, or Councilmember Benedict talks about branding, and that's exactly what they've chosen, and they've spent money on the marketing and all that with this name. If they choose to change the name because they find it to be confusing or whatever, I think that's incumbent upon them and their choice. But right now, I just think there's other things that we could be discussing that are probably more substantive. And so I would encourage, in the spirit of that, I would encourage the sponsor of this amendment just to withdraw this particular amendment and move on.
Thank you. Councilmember Benedict, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. So I couldn't agree more with the sponsor that the investor could change the name of this all they want, but in the legislation in front of us, I don't think we should. I think we should call it what we've been calling it, and especially given the information that the investor has a problem with John Shelby, and that's why he asked to change this name. So with that, if I could call the question, or somebody could call the question, I'm ready to take the vote.
Thank you.
I know that I can't, Chair, Council, because I've been talking, but I don't know if anybody.
Any further discussion? Seeing none anyway. All in favor? C2. All opposed? Did you ever, sorry, Councilmember Parker, did you ever hand up in opposition? And 4. Sorry, could everyone with their in favor please raise their hand again, please? All opposed? Councilmember Vo, were you opposed to? 1, 2, 3. So can you keep your hands up, please? Sorry, people keep raising and lowering their hands. 1, 2. Any not voting? We do not recommend approval. 4 in favor, 5 against, 0 not voting. Next amendment on this is Amendment 13 by myself. Do we have a motion by a committee member? Moved and seconded. What this amendment does is expand the permitted uses to include animal hospitals as a permitted use in the east use area. Reason for this, if you have a pet and you have an emergency, you don't really want to drive across town to find an animal hospital. So this would expand the permitted uses in this area to allow animal hospitals. So you can have this as a neighborhood center and have more of your hopefully not everyday uses, only in an emergency use in a neighborhood setting in the event there's an emergency with a pet. That's it. Any discussion on Amendment 13? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any not voting? Recommend approval. Abstain? Okay. Recommend approval, 9 in favor, 0 against, 1 not voting. The next item is item 16 by Council Member Evans. Do we have a motion by a committee member? Moved and seconded. Council Member Evans, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll be very quick. This amendment requires taller buildings to submit an independent shadow study and be designed so key public spaces like the promenade, the parks, the major corridors get at least 4 hours of direct sunlight during the day to the benefit of pedestrians and bikers. So it's setting clear and objective standards for building design, including step backs to prevent long-term shadow impacts.
Thank you for that explanation. Any discussion on the amendment? Councilmember Parker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate the sponsor of the amendment for bringing it, but I don't think I can support this today. In urban environments, often some of the relief that we get, we're in a climate where we have a lot more hot days than cold days, and sometimes you don't necessarily want to be in the sun when you're out in the street in the South. And so I don't know that, if this is like a great idea for Chicago, I don't know if it makes a ton of sense as I read it. And I've just had a few hours to review this, so I could have it wrong, but I'm not able to support it today.
Thank you. Councilmember, I had the same thought myself. Having more daylight often sounds like a good idea, but in a city such as Nashville, which has a lot of hot days, I think we often find people far from seeking sunshine, seek relief from it in shade, most often from buildings. So I think this is not some detriment that we need to discourage here. So I will be joining you in voting against this. Councilmember Benedict, did I see your hand? Councilmember Benedict, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. One thing I was thinking about that planning mentioned a minute ago, which is about prioritizing the ground plane. And I'm curious, with step backs that allow that, I wonder if this also is something that would support the ground plane development, the development of the ground plane that we would like to see inherent in the other design, how this might help as well.
Planning, you're recognized.
Sure, sure. So we did look at some initial shadow studies when we were drafting the standards and regulations for this sub-district, and we took all of that into consideration in regards to where those shadows fell. Generally, and we also have looked at step backs and have crafted them in a way that we feel like is inclusive of creating a good ground plane. all of that was taken into consideration. I don't think that this would necessarily create, from our understanding of it, a better ground plane. Once you get above a certain level, that is not felt at the ground level anyway as a pedestrian or as a bicyclist. And so we did look at initial shadow studies when we were making our recommendations on the heights as approved by the Planning Commission.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion on this amendment? Councilmember Cap, you are recognized.
Yes, without knowing the angles and the hours and the declinations and so forth, I think this is an idea that's worth discussing. So I'll morph this into a question, which is, can the planning staff share with us the modeling that they have on this? I haven't seen that, and I think this is an interesting idea. I think what I read this to do is only to look at certain really important public space and not, looking at shadows generally or prohibiting them generally, but to just make sure that the pedestrian bridge and the public green space is sort of has the character that we hope it has, which is to be welcoming and inviting. So I'd love to see what planning has on that. I hope they would share that with us, and I would. I think I would support this in committee today, subject to further discussion about the details.
Planning, you're recognized.
Sure, I'm happy to share the initial information that we have, and I will also say that generally through the DRC process, we will ask for shadow studies. However, we also don't find that creating shadows is necessarily a bad thing. It can allow for an appreciation or view of architecture that you may not otherwise be able to have. It can create shade from our hot summer sun that I think that we all recognize is pretty important, especially in our climate. And so we don't necessarily find that those are necessarily a bad thing, but we generally will ask for shadow studies across the downtown, not just for certain areas, but there's not typically a requirement for a certain number of hours of sun.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Evans, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. And I guess kind of to that point related to the process of the shadow study, in this context, like looking at the pedestrian realm and the public realm kind of holistically, like how do we make sure that we don't end up with every building is built to whatever height that, planning and the applicant decides to build it at. And I agree that shadows can be helpful in the dead of summer, but, not as helpful, when it's winter, or, that if we end up with a canyon effect, like some places have, that can be problematic longer term. And so how do we make sure that holistically we don't end up with that happening as a project or as the whole process kind of moves forward and buildings are built?
Thank you for that explanation. I think we our Budget Committee, which meets after this, is losing quorum rapidly, and I've been requested we move this conversation forward as quickly as we can. I think we have a full debate there. Is there anybody who wishes to provide any critical comments on this amendment before we vote on it? Okay, seeing none. All in favor? All opposed? Any not voting? We do not recommend approval. 2 in favor, 6 against, 1 not voting. The next amendment is Amendment 17 by Councilmember Vo. Councilmember Vo, you are recognized for, do we have a motion?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to move my amendment.
Moved and seconded.
Thank you. This is just requesting that the Planning Department look at a cumulative environmental impact study. For me, this area in the river touches everyone, and we are all impacted by that. And with this new area, I just want to make sure that the air that we're breathing, the water, and everything, imagine East Bank said that this was going to be a green neighborhood. So I just think that this is a great opportunity for us to be able to look at all the impacts and provide alternatives so that we are really looking at centering the people of Nashville and how it will affect them.
Thank you for that explanation. Any discussion on Amendment 17? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Any not voting? We recommend approval, 7 in favor, 0 against, 2 not voting. Next amendment is Amendment 18, also by Councilmember Vo. Councilmember Vo, are you wishing to move this amendment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to move the amendment.
Moved and seconded.
This is just focusing on the digital signs. With everyone talking about this area being a neighborhood, I want to make sure that we're centering the people. I live in a district that has like a lot of my constituents have complained about light. And so I just want to be really mindful that we make sure that the standards here are neighborhood first and that, you know, the signs are appropriate for this area.
Thank you for that explanation. Any discussion on Amendment 18? Councilmember Coupin, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Planning table, can you talk about how the existing DTC sign guidelines relate to this? Is this more restrictive or is this similar to what we already have?
Planning, you're recognized.
Sure. So currently, the sign code as applicable to DTC, the sign code is applicable to DTC in regards to prohibited signs. So the sign code already prohibits the full motion video signs. They would be prohibited. This doesn't define displays, but signs, full motion signs are already prohibited. And you can't modify your way into a prohibited sign in the DTC. And so full motion video signs are prohibited in downtown. Static digital signs are permitted. You have to do a common signage plan and with modification, or I'm sorry, a common signage plan for any project that goes through the DTC DRC. So this already, some of what is being called out in here is already regulated and prohibited throughout the DTC.
Thank you for that explanation. Anything further, Councilmember Coupin?
Thank you, and thank you to my colleague for bringing this. I'm going to abstain on this one. Just want to look into it further. Obviously, just got it this morning, but appreciate the discussion.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Amendment 18? Seeing none, all in favor? 4, 5. All opposed? Any not voting? 2, 3. We recommend approval, 5 in favor, 1 against, 3 not voting. So that was our final amendment. We have now considered every amendment except Amendment 1, which was not considered, and Amendment 9, which was withdrawn. So now we are on consideration of the bill with recommended amendments for Amendment 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12, 13, 14, 17, and 18. Any discussion on the bill with the recommended approvals for those amendments? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Any not voting? Recommend approval of the bill with the recommended amendments, 9 in favor, 0 against, 0 not voting. Our final item before everybody leaves is item 18. This is the associated rezoning. It is BL 2026-1284, sponsors Coupin. An ordinance to amend Title 17 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, zoning ordinance of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County by changing from IG to DTC zoning for various properties located east of Korean Veterans Boulevard and south of Sylvan Street. Do we have a motion? Moved and seconded. Councilmember Coupin, are you wishing to speak on this? Saying none. All in favor? Any opposed? Any not voting? Recommend approval. 7 in favor, 0 against, 0 not voting. And that concludes our committee meeting. Thank you.